For 2 hours, he had been sitting like this, and it had no idea why he was here in the first place. It had tried to maintain its fixed gaze, but now it was slouched in its favorite chair, staring down, constantly avoiding locking eyes with him, as if spotlights were still directed at it. What was going on here? 2 hours ago, there had been a knock on the door, and it had opened the door, as always, with a broad smile on its face. However, he hadn't smiled when he saw it. On the contrary, he had recoiled in shock. With an inviting gesture, he had invited it into his small cabin in the woods. It liked it quiet and undisturbed. When it had built this cabin many years ago, the surrounding area was as inhabited as a moor. Literally, as far as the eye could see, there was no one in sight. But that had changed now. Humans had erected a city near its peaceful little cabin. In itself, it had nothing against it, it liked visitors. Humans were so cute with their small fingers and crazy hairstyles. Unfortunately, it had only visited a few humans, and whenever it had been seen, they had usually fled in fear. But not him. He had followed the invitation and entered the cabin, but now it wished it had never let him in. He wore black boots with silver caps that produced a metallic clatter with each step he took inside the cabin, making it flinch at each step. His pants were also black, but what scared it the most was his belt buckle. A silver-gleaming snake with scarlet-red eyes coiled on the buckle, and the longer it looked at it, the more the snake seemed to move. He still said nothing. It could discern no expression on his face, which was covered with scars. Maybe he had no mouth. It couldn't tell because the lower part of his face was completely covered by a mask through which he seemed to breathe. Each of his breaths was filled with a rattling sound, and a brief cough followed each exhale. It couldn't sit like this any longer. It cautiously rose. He followed it with his eyes as it moved to one of its shelves and pulled something out. A photo album. It opened it. It had always made sure to take photos of everything cool it experienced. On the right side picture, it sat with a coconut, a straw protruding, under palm trees on a beautiful sandy beach. The photo on the other side showed it trying to stay on a surfboard hit by a massive wave. The beach in the background of the photo was deserted. It could still remember the humans on the beach fleeing in terror when they saw it. It sighed and flipped the page. On the next page, it was with its entire family, joyfully sitting around a fire, laughing heartily. It hadn't seen its family since then. It kept telling itself they were too busy to visit. Well, that can happen. Suddenly, he stood up, as if he had heard something. With his clattering steps, he approached it and stopped in front of it. It was tall, but he made it look small. It had a feeling about what would happen now. He threw a sack over it, and everything went dark. When it came to, it was all alone. He was gone, but it was not at home either. Unfamiliar trees rose, and the full moon cast their eerie shadows, swaying in the light howling wind. Carefully, it stood up. Around it, the bushes rustled, and the shrubs shook as if they had just gotten goosebumps. It took a few cautious steps, but when it looked up, it stopped. From the branches, red and yellow eyes stared down at it, and trembling, it forced itself to continue walking, knowing that the eyes would follow it everywhere. After several hours, it stopped and looked in fear at her. She wore a pitch-black cloak and a hood that covered her entire face. Her hands were pale, and with her right hand, she gripped the iron handle of a scythe whose blade sparkled in the moonlight. She, it knew, was Death. It wanted to turn back, wanted to run away and never return, but something about her forced it to come closer, and so it continued to move closer to Death. Until it stopped just in front of her, the coldness of her body surrounded it, making it shiver. With her icy hand, she touched its shoulder and pointed with her scythe towards a cave it hadn't noticed before. She wanted it to go in there. It shook its head, it was afraid, it didn't want to go yet. She put her cold arm around its shoulder, and gently, almost tenderly, she nudged it in that direction. Now the cave was no longer just a cave for it, it was magically drawn to it. It walked like in a trance toward the cave and left Death behind. Only in the cave did it notice that Death had put something in its hand-knitted jacket pocket. With trembling fingers, it pulled it out. It was the photo of it with its family around the campfire, but now, something was written on the back, admission ticket. It read it aloud and entered the cave Death had sent it into, and a howling echoed through the night.